Hello and welcome to another episode of the Adobe Creative Suite podcast. My name is Terry White, and in this episode, we're going to take a look at how to get started with Adobe Illustrator CS6, 10 things beginners want to know how to do. Now, the challenge for me here is that while I've been using Illustrator for the last 25 years, since version 1.1, I believe it was, I'm not an artist. I don't consider myself I don't draw by hand. I don't doodle. I don't create artwork by drawing. But I do create artwork all the time in Illustrator by drawing, by using the tools there. So while I wouldn't pick up a sketch pad and sketch something out because it would look horrible, that's just not my forte. I've used Illustrator for tons of things, for thousands of projects throughout the years because of what it does and what it's for. Now let's talk about that for a quick second. For those of you who are new to Illustrator, I get this question all the time. Well, if I have Photoshop, why do I need Illustrator? What's the difference? Well, in a nutshell, there are two drastically different programs for the kind of art they create. Yes, there is some overlap. Photoshop is pixel based. Everything you do in Photoshop, the end result are little tiny squares that make up an image. Illustrator, on the other hand, is vector-based art. Mathematical lines and curves. You're drawing with objects. And therefore, it's resolution independent. And you can scale up an Illustrator logo from something maybe the size of a business card to the size of a building in a skyline in New York City. And it would look as good as it did on that small business card. Whereas a photo would begin to fall apart the larger you make it. So that's the biggest difference and scientific difference between the two. Now let's get in and see how to get started for my brand new Illustrator users, assuming that you've had very little use or maybe you've even opened it now just for the first time. So if you're an Illustrator Pro, you probably know a lot of this. But if you're just getting started with Illustrator, this is what you would want to know how to do the first 10 things. So I've launched Illustrator CS6. And the first thing, obviously, you're going to want to know how to do is start with a new document. Now, you have new from template and you have new. New from template means you're going to basically take a piece of artwork that you're going to trace in Illustrator. So maybe it is a photo, but you want to make a vector version. But I'm just going to start with a blank page. We're just going to say new, and here's where you have to make some decisions. Not only, of course, the name of your document, which you can do here or when you save it, but more importantly, the profile. What kind of art are you creating? Is the art for print? That means it's going to be color separated. Is it for web? Meaning it's going to go on a website, web banner, some type of web work. Is it for a device? Maybe it's going into an application on your, that you're going to create for your iPad or your Android tablet or smartphone. Is it for video or film? Maybe it's a logo that you're going to animate in Adobe After Effects, or you're just going to put as a lower third in Adobe Premiere. Basic RGB and Flash Builder. So lots of choices here to decide where you're going to start. And if you say, well, I'm going to print it and do some of these other things, then I would probably go ahead and say start with print. But if you say, no, this logo is just pretty much for on-screen use, then I would probably pick one of the other ones. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with web. Now, by the way, let me show you the difference. If I do pick print, it's going to change the color mode to CMYK. Even though we aren't really doing pixels per se, it's going to set the default for 300 pixels per inch if we output it as pixels. And if I choose web or any of the other ones, it's going to choose RGB. And the difference here is it's choosing, giving me screen sizes by default or display sizes. Versus if I do print, it's giving me standard print sizes. So that's kind of what it's setting you up for. What are you going to do with this artwork once you do it? Now, I know people that design flyers, for example, in Illustrator, from start to finish. They want to make the whole flyer there. Well, that'd probably be a print job, and you probably set it to something like 8.5 by 11 or larger. But if it's for a screen size, probably pick web or something else. Now, of course, that's going to make the color mode RGB, which is going to give you the most colors versus CMYK. And you can always convert it down, by the way, if you choose later to print it, you can always change the color mode to CMYK. Your colors may shift a little, but you can do it. So I'm going to go ahead and say, just give me a standard web document using the defaults 960 by 960 by 560. And the other thing that we're going to talk about a little bit later are artboards. We're not going to jump into that right away, but we'll click OK, and there's my artwork. Okay, so that was number one, setting up your new document, making that choice, print, web, device, whatever. Number two, actually drawing objects. And again, we're going to talk about the difference between those objects versus pixels. So typical Illustrator projects that people are teaching always usually start out with a box because it's a concept that everyone can understand. So if I just draw, with my hand, not really holding down any modifier keys, I'm going to get a rectangle, or if I'm really careful, maybe I can get a perfect square. But when I let go, that is now an object on my page. I can pick it up, I can move it around, I can resize it, I can do whatever I want to do with it. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a second one. And of course, now I have two objects on the page overlapping each other. Now, we're going to talk about number 3 and number 4, but I'm just going to pick this object up first to show you the difference. So I can pick it up, I can pick up this one and move it around, pick up this one and move it around. Those are objects on the screen. Versus if I had painted those with pixels, they would be on the canvas and it wouldn't be as easy to select them and move them around or pick them up. So I'd have to always, in Photoshop, for example, if I wanted to be able to do that, work in layers. Whereas here, I can work on one layer for everything or have many layers for different things. It's up to me. Now, the next thing, number three, stroke and fill. Now, when I first created these objects, my last stroke and fill, where my fill was white and my stroke was black. So that means that this rectangle has a white color in it and has a black stroke around it, just like the one that's already on the page. So if I say remove the fill for that selected object, now I can see through it. I can see the rectangle behind it. If I say give it a different fill, let's do this. I can choose a different color, and now it's got that color on it, but it still has the black stroke. I can click and toggle back and forth between these two to change whichever one I want. Or I can just go up to the control panel and change them individually. So I can say, well, give me a orange stroke on that and make the stroke thicker so we can actually see it. So stroke versus fill. That's normally the next thing people want to know the difference between. That's number 3. And your fill can be patterns, it can be gradients, it can be solid colors. You can lower the opacity of either one. You can do all kinds of things. So even if I go back here to the fill, I can say that I want to lower the opacity of that fill so that it now becomes transparent. So stroke, fill. The fill is the inside, the stroke is the outside. All right, let me undo that last one I did. And now let's talk about ways of selecting. You have 2 selection tools. You have this is number 4, by the way, if you're keeping track. This is your selection tool and your direct selection tool. Now, I look at it, it's the easiest way to explain this is your selection tool is when you want to select an object and you want to pick up that object and move it around. So no matter where I click on these objects, I can click on them and move them around, provided I'm clicking on part of the object. So if it had a fill of none, I'd be clicking through it. But whether I pick it up on the stroke or pick it up on the fill, I am moving it. Now, you also notice that when it's selected, I have these handles. These handles allow me to quickly resize or reshape it. If I want to keep it proportional, then I would hold down the Shift key, and that will reshape it or resize it with its current proportions as I pick it up and move it around or grab one of the corner handles to size. So that's what your selection tool does. Now let me deselect, which basically means click off of it onto the canvas, onto nothing. And then I'm going to switch to the direct selection tool. And think of the direct selection tool as allowing me to directly manipulate a part of that object. So if I go to my direct selection tool, it will auto highlight any of the points that make up this object. So there are 4 points that make up a rectangle or a square, one on each corner. So when I click one of these points, it is now selected. The other 3 are white. The one that's selected is blue. That means I can now reshape this object by grabbing the points and directly manipulating them. So that's why it's called the direct selection tool, because you can directly manipulate any of the points or paths. So for example, if I just pick up that path, I can move it around. I'm directly manipulating. So selection tool versus direct selection tool. So if I go back to the selection tool, now I'm picking up the entire object, moving it around. If I come off to the side here, I can rotate that object. I can do all kinds of things to the object as an object, but I'm no longer directly manipulating individual points or paths. So that is number 4, select versus direct selection. Now let's go to number 5, combining shapes. Now there are a couple of ways to do this. I'm going to delete what I've got here. And we're going to switch drawing from the rectangle tool to the ellipse tool. And I'm going to teach you a couple things right off the bat here. First of all, we're going to go back to no fill. And we'll go to, actually we'll just set our defaults. We'll go back to a black and white, and then we'll say no fill. Okay, so now what we draw from here on out will have no fill, but it'll just have a black stroke. Now, I'm on the ellipse tool, which is normally for drawing ovals or circles. And if you want to constrain your squares, your circles, your triangles, whatever you're drawing with, to a perfect shape, hold down the Shift key. That will force it to be a perfect circle. So I cannot distort that to an oval while I'm holding down the Shift key. When I'm ready to let go, you always let go of your mouse first. In this case, by the way, I'm using a Wacom pen. And then you can let go of the Shift key. And speaking of pens, I'm doing this whole thing on a Wacom Cintiq. You definitely want to invest in some type of tablet if you're going to work in Illustrator or Photoshop for that matter and do a lot of detailed work. I'll get into that in a few minutes on one of the next ones that's coming up as to why that's important. But just note that no matter what tablet you buy, even a $50 tablet is better than a $100 mouse any day of the week. It's just going to give you more control, more abilities to draw with. Okay, so and you'll just have a better experience using the Adobe products with the tablet. Okay, so now that I've got this circle, I want to draw another circle. Now, Illustrator has what are called smart guides, so things that light up as I come around and touch different, or not even touching, but hover over different areas. So if I start at this point at the top here, and I start drawing a perfect circle, I hold down my Shift key. When I get to the center point of this shape, it will highlight and let go. So, oops, let me undo that. I let go too soon. But it will highlight and let go to let me know that, hey, you're in the center if you let go right now. Okay, so same thing here. If I hover over this point and draw another one, hold down the Shift key, and when I get near the center and let go, I know that that circle is a perfect circle from the bottom of the circle to the center, from the top of the circle to the center. Now I want to select all of these, which, oops, don't want to draw a new one. Let's go back to our selection tool. Let's just simply drag a selection around all 3 objects. And now I could use basic align functions to align these objects. So I just brought up my alignment panel from the top here, and we're just going to align the centers. So now I know that those are perfectly aligned from the center point. Now that they are perfectly aligned, I'm going to grab my ellipse tool one more time. And now I want to draw a perfect circle from the center of this top circle. Now if I hold down and start drawing, it will do it from the center in the direction I draw out in. But if I hold down my Option key or Alt key and hold down my Shift key, I will have a perfect circle from the center point. So Option says draw your box, your rectangle, your circle, your oval, whatever, from the point where you first clicked and started dragging. Shift, again, makes it a perfect shape, perfect circle in this case. Now, a lot of times we draw things that we want to have another one, another circle, 5 circles, 10 circles, whatever, and we want them to be exactly the same, but we don't want to have to keep drawing them over and over again. So I'm going to show you, this is a bonus one. It's not one of your 10, but it's one I use all the time. And that is, I'm going to hold down my Option or Alt key. with my selection tool and drag the one I just did. And that will give me a perfect shape, perfect selection, perfect drag duplicate of the one I just did, because I use my guides that light up automatically. So now I've got these shapes here, and I'm going to select them all, again with the selection tool, and we're going to combine them together and to get like a yin-yang. I borrowed this technique from my colleague Rufus. He does this all the time, and I think it's pretty cool. So one of the new tools to combine shapes with is the Shape Builder tool. And once you make a selection, the Shape Builder tool will automatically identify anything you hover over as a potential shape that can be combined. So if I want to combine this circle with the bigger circle underneath, I just click and drag between the two, and that will combine the two. So that's giving me the beginnings of my yin and yang. And again, we'll do the same thing over here, drag, and that is combine the two. So now those are, without me having to draw a perfect circle, ovalish, swishy thing, it just did it for me by combining the two shapes. Now I want to use the one on top, which is just a black stroke with no fill on top of another black stroke with no fill. I want to actually use it to cut out the shape underneath. So using the same Shape Builder tool, all I do is hold down my Option or Alt key, and you'll notice that instead of a plus sign, I get a minus symbol on the tool. So now if I just click, that will cut out that shape underneath. Okay, so now that we've done that, the next thing we need to do is start filling. So we'll use our selection tool, and we'll select the one on the bottom here, and we'll just fill that with black. Oops, didn't select only the one. There we go. And we'll fill that with black now. There we go. And we'll select this one. And how am I filling it? Well, I'm using a shortcut. I'm basically taking the black stroke and toggling it using this little curved arrow, which says switch them. So instead of a no fill black stroke, make it a black fill with no stroke. So I'm just basically cheating and just toggling the two. So now it's a black circle with no stroke and a white, or I'm sorry, a black shape at the bottom with no stroke, just by toggling those two. So that was a quick way to combine multiple objects. And if you're just looking for something simpler, maybe you don't want to create a yin-yang, if you just even took something like that, and then you took something like this, and you just said, hey, I can't draw a shape like that freehand. It's just easier if I select those now and use my Shape Builder and just combine, oops. There we go, Shape Builder, and just combine them. So now that shape, if you're drawing the top of a toilet, maybe that shape has now been created. Okay, and again, I can reshape these because now it's one thing, or use my direct selection tool, which would be a better thing to use in this case, to just combine the top down. So, and of course, since this is one shape, no matter how I drew it, I can always rotate it and get the look that I'm looking for. So if you were trying to make your own custom lowercase p, I kind of did that for you. All right, so that is combining shapes. And again, once they're combined, they work as one piece, just as if you'd drawn it that way. So even if you want to direct select to directly manipulate any portion of it, you can. So you can directly manipulate any of this to reshape it to your heart's content, because now you have access to the points that you've drawn. Okay, so that was combining shapes number 5. So I'm going to select all this now and just delete it. And now we're going to get in number 6, which is using, what if you want to draw something that's not a square or a circle or triangle or polygon or something like that? Well, there are lots of free form drawing tools. I did a whole tutorial on how to use the pen tool. You can look that up on my YouTube channel. But the pen tool is basically for drawing straight lines by clicking point to point, or, and by the way, we want to give that a stroke and a fill. There we go. Or by drawing curves by dragging out these points. So you can create or trace around pretty much anything with the pen tool. The pen tool is probably one of the oldest tools in Illustrator because this is the way people used to trace things and still do. All right, so that's the pen tool. Now if we, here, let's get back to our defaults. If we go into the line tool, the line tool's for drawing lines. And those lines can have any kind of here, let's go to the weight here. They can have any kind of thickness to them. They can also, if you go to your stroke panel, let's expand that out. There we go. If we show our options here, they can even have arrowheads, and you can customize the endings as well. So you can create lots of cool lines, paths, whatever, to draw your particular illustration. Now, of course, we already talked about the shape tools: rectangle, rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, star, flare. Pencil is one that I would have used back in the day to kind of maybe freeform my way around something that may be easier to do than using the pen tool and using exact Bezier points. Or if I feel lucky enough to try and draw something, I could use the pencil to do that. Again, a lot easier with a tablet than trying to do that with a mouse. But since then, Illustrator's introduced and enhanced a couple of new tools. So let's go to the blob brush. The blob brush is actually, I used to use the pencil more often, but now I use the blob more often when I am trying to kind of draw something, because I just like the fact that it's kind of giving me, here, let's look at the outlines here. It's giving me a filled path. So instead of the line tool or the pencil tool just being a solid stroke, this is giving me a path that can be filled. All right, so, and it can be expanded therefore. So let's go back to, by the way, that was Command Y for outline, Command Y or Control Y for, to turn it off. All right, if we double click on the blob brush options, we can control the size, we can control the shape, we can control the angle. You can also set these to be random or pressure sensitive. And now I can get a different kind of stroke, including the one that I use perhaps for a signature. So blob brush is great for free form drawing. And again, the advantage here is that your object becomes a path that can be manipulated and adjusted as needed. So that is the blob brush. And last but not least, the one that I probably use more than any of them is the paintbrush. And the reason I say more than any of them is because you can have custom brushes. So again, I'm not an artist. I'm not really going to draw a lot with this tool. However, I could. But more importantly, if we go to the brushes panel, there are some basic default brushes here. So the basic brush is the one that we just drew. The charcoal brush is kind of cool for getting that charcoal look to it. And here, if we double click, yeah, we'll leave that the way it is. Okay, we'll double click this, and we will go and make a, let's see here, we'll make a fixed width, make it a little bit bigger. Click OK. Now, whenever you make an adjustment, it says, hey, do you want me to fix the ones that you already drew, or you want to leave those alone? We'll leave those alone and draw new ones. There we go. That's more, you can see more of the charcoal effect there. And next, and of course we added bristle brushes that kind of give it the illusion of being painted, even though those are still vectors. Those aren't pixels. But if you say, hey, that's still drawing and I don't draw, then you can load up different brush libraries. So if we go to the flyout menu from the brushes panel, we can go to Open Brush Library, where there are a lot of cool libraries that come with Illustrator. So for example, if I go to Decorative Banners and Seals, this is a panel. I can add any one of these I want, but let's just click on one. And now, hey, I need a banner. There, done. I need a different kind of banner that goes that way. Done. So these are actual brush strokes. I need a seal. Done. So I'm clicking in some cases and dragging in others to get my seal. There we go. So these are all brushes that I can use that are built in. And if we go back to the brushes library, oops, open brush library, there are also cool bristle brushes that you can use. And here, let's do one more. Brush library, let's go to artistic. Artistic, there are all kinds of borders too, but artistic calligraphic. And these are all the different ones that I have open. So, you can have at it, have a good time doing all of these cool brushes. Okay, so, ooh, that's cool. Okay, as you can see, you can have a lot of fun with Illustrator even if you can't draw like I can. All right, so with that, we've talked about pen, pencil, brush, and that was number 6. Now let's talk about how to trace. So in this case, I'm going to close my blank document because I'm going to open up a document that lets me talk about a few more things. And let's go to recent files, and let's go to this one. Okay, first and foremost, this particular document has an area page blank area on a page here that I want to actually put something on. And what I want to put on this page is something that I want to trace. I want to actually put something on a page that is pixels. So not drawn with Illustrator, at least not yet. So we're going to go to our File menu in Place. And it's going to let me go to my hard drive and grab anything I want. I'm going to go grab the green leaf JPEG. So JPEG right off the bat lets me know that that is pixel based. That is not vector. So when I choose place, there it is. It loads it onto the page for me. I can scale it, of course. So let's go ahead and scale that down, holding down my shift key to maintain proportions. But if we zoom in on that now, we can see, zoom in some more here. We can start to see the anti-aliasing around the edge because these are pixels. This is not vector work. Now, what I want from this is an actual vector rendition of it. Now, of course, I could put that on a layer, lower the opacity, make a new layer on top of it, and start tracing around each leaf until I've got it traced. Might take me 20 minutes, might take me an hour, might take me 2 hours, depending on how intricate I want to be. Or I can use Illustrator's tracing abilities to trace this for me. So let's close the brushes panel. Let's go up to the window menu and come down to the image trace panel. So with image trace, new in CS6, it's been enhanced to be a lot faster, easier, 64-bit, all the great things we want, and to give us much better results. So the preset right now is on default. I can choose any one of these presets or adjust it to my heart's content. So let's start with just simply, let's actually just do low fidelity photo. So what it's doing right now is analyzing the photo for me. I don't have to do anything else. And it's figuring out what it looks like and tracing it. Done. That was it. If we now zoom in on this, this is now vector. I can make this as big as I want it to be, and it will never lose any quality. I can scale this to my heart's content. I now have a vector rendition of those leaves just by clicking an option in image trace. If I want maybe a grayscale, just do shades of gray. It will analyze it again because it has to look at the shading and colors from the original photo, and then it will start to give me shades of gray. So again, zooming in on that, that is my new vector that is now grayscale. I could also say, just give me, actually, there's a preset for it. Just give me, let's do line art. Actually, it's going to do it, but I want a different one. That's not the one I want. I want silhouettes. So silhouettes just basically makes it into black. You know, no shades of gray, just black and white. Okay, so now that I've done that, If I want to actually now go into my vectors that it created and get to the individual points and paths that I can manipulate, like I did with the direct selection tool, then there's one more button I'm going to press at the top here called expand. When I expand it, that's saying, okay, take that beautiful thing you drew and now let me mess with it. So now that's been expanded, I can go into my swatches, which is where we save colors, and I can make that, oops, undo. Let's double click on this to get into it. There we go. And now we can make it whatever color we want. Okay, why might you trace something other than the obvious benefit of now it's vector and it's resolution independent? Well, I'm going to throw a bonus one in. This is not part of the 10, but it's one that I do get asked all the time. And that is using and making patterns. So, for example, if I select this piece of artwork, here, let's back out of it. And we select this piece of artwork, we can now say object, pattern, make. And that will bring up the new pattern making interface for Illustrator. And this interface basically allows me to do whatever I want. So I can take this object and I can duplicate it, holding down my Option key, just like I did with the circles. I can rotate it. I can fill it with a different color. I can fill it with a gradient. I can stroke it if I want to. I can scale it if I want to. And whatever I do, it will update the pattern. So I can drag this one up here. I can rotate this one. I can now give that one a different color, just so it stands out. I can lower the opacity if I want, so it stands out kind of more like a background color. And again, I can keep doing this, even introducing additional elements in here if I want to make my new pattern. Now, once I've done that, and get out of swatches here, go back to my pattern options if I want to make any changes there. But I can say that I'm done, basically at the top here. I'm done making my pattern. And I get back to my standard Illustrator. But what it has done for me is if we head over to a different artboard, where I've got an illustration here that was drawn, I can go into my swatches now, and it will be the last swatch, and I can fill that with that pattern. So vector-based patterns, resolution independent, scale them to whatever size you want. Another bonus, not part of the top 10. But what is part of the top 10 is layers and artboards. So let's talk about artboards first since we're here. All right, artboards will be number 8. If I zoom out, I'm just pressing Command minus, by the way, and Control minus on Windows. It will show me 6 individual panels. These panels would be pages in another document, like InDesign, or artboards is what they're called in Illustrator. And you can have multiple artboards. Remember when we said give it a new document, how many artboards do you want? That's saying I want to start off with 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 artboards. And the artboards will be, when you do it that way, they will all be the same size by default, but you can make a new artboard or you can change an artboard using the artboard tool. So the artboard tool allows me to go in and draw a new artboard. So now I've added page 7. I can make that new artboard whatever size I want. I can also give it a preset, so I can say make that a letter size artboard. And now I have a new page to create on. So why multiple artboards? Because people in Illustrator create campaigns of artwork. So they might have the flyer, the mailer, the web banner, all these different documents, and all of them would be on different artboards. So that when they export it as a PDF or print it, they will get a print of each different artboard. Just the same reason you make multiple pages in any other document. All right, so now let's talk about layers. Let's get out of this. Let's go to this artboard we just created. Let's zoom in on it. And let's do something simple. We'll create our filled circle, and we'll create another shape. And this time we'll just simply fill that one with solid color here. All right, and we've got now two shapes. If we go to our layers panel, which this is number 9, our layers panel shows us, oh, actually, this is a bad example because this one already had a bunch of layers. Let's make a new document. Kind of want, you wouldn't have all those layers in yours. So let's start from scratch. All right, so new, couple new objects here. And you see right off the bat on the layers panel, it started with layer 1. But the layers here are unlike Photoshop layers in that they have sub-layers. So when and here, let's fill this one with something different so we can see it better. So when I twirl this down, I will see both objects. Here, let's select this one and make it a different color so we can see that one as well. And I see both objects on the sub-layers of layer 1. And what's cool is you can control the individual objects. So I can turn that sub-layer off even though I didn't turn layer 1 off. If I make a new layer, so now I have a layer 2. Of course, if layer 2 is selected and I start creating things on layer 2, they will automatically be on layer 2. Here, let's make it totally different. There we go. But if I want to move something between layers, I can. So I can turn layer 2 off, completely off. Of course, it's completely off. If I say, hey, I want this blue circle, this blue object, to be on layer 2, I can target it by clicking the circle. So now it's targeted. And then I can drag the little blue rectangle up to layer 2. So now layer 2 contains those 2 objects. Layer 1 only contains the 1 object. So that's how layers work inside, in a nutshell, how they work inside Illustrator. You can get a lot more fancy, especially when you start grouping objects, because the groups show up as sublayers, and you can move things in and out of groups that way. So that is number 9. We're at the end, number 10. So now that you've done all this, you've got a good handle on starting with Illustrator, what kinds of things can be drawn, what you can do with it. How do you get out of it? Meaning, what do you get out of it? So obviously we can go up to File and Print, but what if you want to hand a document off to someone? What do you do? Well, if I go to File and Save, that's going to let me save it as an Illustrator file, as an EPS, as a PDF, or template. I'm not even going to confuse you with these other 2 or these other 3 or 4 right now. Just know that Illustrator, EPS, PDF are going to be your most commonly used options. Template means it's going to save it so you can open it back up without saving over or editing or messing up your original. But the 3 you're going to use the most for save are Illustrator, EPS, PDF. Now, Illustrator, that's a simple one to explain. That means I'm going to work on it again. Save it as an Illustrator document, close it, come back tomorrow, open up the Illustrator document, everything's there, keep working. EPS it can still be worked on, but you're going to save it out in that format to put it in another program that can't handle Illustrator documents. Luckily, if you're working in an Adobe workflow, if you're going from Illustrator to InDesign, for example, you can place the Illustrator document. You don't have to save it as an EPS. But if you were saving it to put in some other foreign non-Adobe program, then you might need to save it as an EPS for that program to accept it. And of course, we all know what PDF is, portable document format. That means that it can be opened up with the Adobe Reader. It can be viewed on mobile devices, and pretty much anyone can see it, even if they never heard of Illustrator. That's what you would save it in. Now, those are the save commands. One more. File, export. You have a lot more formats you can export to if EPS, Illustrator, and PDF aren't enough. So you can go all the way back to a Macintosh PICT format, back in the pre-OS 10 days. You can save it as a JPEG, so you can make it raster. Just get rid of all your vectors, make a JPEG version of your image. You can save it as a Photoshop file, and that's kind of interesting because that will try and maintain as much as you can, keep all your layers so that you can open up in Photoshop and do Photoshop effects on it. And of course, some of these other formats are kind of self-explanatory. AutoCAD, if you're going to AutoCAD, Targa is a common video format, TIFF, common print format, so forth and so on. So Illustrator can save out in just about anything you need to save out in for any purpose. Now, one more thing, if we go back to save, I just want to point out that you do have the ability to even save down. And what I mean by that is, if I click OK now, it'll save it as an Illustrator CS6 document, because that's what I'm using. But you can save it all the way back to Illustrator 3. So if you're trying to make it compatible for someone with an older version of Illustrator to open it back up, you have the ability to save it down for them. Now, of course, the further down you go, the more things you may lose as far as being editable in that format. So if I save it in a format, or if I use variable widths, for example, and I save it as CS4, well, those variable widths wouldn't be editable as variable widths inside CS4 because CS4 didn't have that feature. So just note that you can save back, the appearance should stay the same, editability remains questionable. So that's it for this episode of the Adobe Creative Suite podcast. My name is Terry White. I hope you learned how to get started with Adobe Illustrator and you're no longer frightened by it. It's a cool program, even though for people that like me that don't draw, I create artwork in it all the time. Thanks again, and we'll catch you next time.